is brilliant. What is the difference? It literally blew my mind when she said this. Butter!
Weird dough.
So in the month of January, I took a class with Learn Monthly called Creative Bakes with Christina Tosi. If you don't know who she is, she's a complete and total icon. She is the owner of Milk Bar, and everything she bakes is like so good. So we should be listening to every single tip she possibly has. And I'm gonna share just a few of the tips that I learned from her with you today. Okay, let's get started. So first on the table, we have our levains. They are chemical leaveners, and we have baking powder and baking soda. Now, a lot of times recipes call for both or one or the other, but there's a reason to use one of each. So throughout the entire class, we used both of these ingredients, and Christina was always saying baking powder, baking soda. Baking powder makes things puff up tall. Baking soda, wide. So if you're ever wondering about how to get your cookies fluffier, baking powder. If you want a little more spread, baking soda. Baking powder, baking soda. The other cool thing about baking powder is it says double acting here. Most baking powders are double acting, and they will activate and start to rise twice. Once when they hit any kind of acid, and again when they hit any kind of heat. So for example, if you're baking a cake and you're using buttermilk is an acid. When the baking powder hits the buttermilk, it activates. Then when it goes in the oven, activates again. That's a pro tip. Another thing that she said throughout the whole class is color equals flavor, fat equals flavor. So those two things are really important in your bakes. Color and fat. A good example is brown sugar versus white sugar. If you taste white sugar, it's sweet, and that's about all the depth of flavor that's there. Just tastes sweet. If you do brown sugar, it has a little more flavor to it. It's like molassesy and like kind of warm. The depth of flavor is much higher with something even like a light brown sugar versus a white sugar. So color equals flavor. And that goes for things like if you taste your cookie dough before it's baked, and then you taste it again once it's baked, you can taste everything is caramelized and gooey, and it has so much more flavor brought out inside of it by baking it in the oven. Color equals flavor. The other one is fat equals flavor, and a great example for that is drink a glass of skim milk, then drink a glass of whole milk. The flavor in whole milk is so much richer and creamier, and there's so much more texture going on there. So fat equals flavor as well. Pro tip. This next pro tip is going to blow your mind. It literally blew my mind when she said this. Anything can be a flour. Anything can be a flour. Your best friend in anything can be a flour is going to be a food processor. I have this teeny tiny little itty bitty one that I got at the grocery store, but you probably have a big one, or maybe you don't, or maybe you just have a Vitamix or some kind of blender that can crush things down. Anything can be a flour. For example, so if you were going to make a s'mores cookie and you wanted to add some more flavor into your s'mores cookie, you could use something like Golden Grams as a flour. All you would do is you take your Golden Grams, you stick them in your little food processor, and you whirl it. And you want to get it as fine as possible. There are still a few chunks in this. I would probably go for a little longer to get it as fine as it can be, but what you do is you substitute this for the flour in your recipe. Your recipe calls for 2 cups of flour for your cookies. You should use a cup of this and a cup of flour. And then your cookies will taste more like graham cracker and more like s'mores than if you just used plain flour. Anything can be a flour. Mind blown. Who knew? It's brilliant. So cereal is a great thing to use. Dehydrated or dried fruit will really like crush down great. Anything you can crush into a flour-like powder like this can be a flour. The other pro tip that she says when substituting your flours in your recipes is you should never go less than substituting half. If you go less than substituting half, the flavor really won't come through like you're expecting it to. So if you're doing 2 cups of flour, do at least 1 cup of Golden Grams for your substitute for your s'mores cookie. Yum. Speaking of flour, there are a wide range of flours out there that you can use in your bakes to get different results. So what I learned from Christina is this: cake flour, all-purpose flour, bread flour. They are three of the main flours you use in your bakes. What is the difference? The amount of protein is the difference in each of these flours. Cake flour has the least amount of protein, middle, all-purpose, most, bread. Now, what does the protein do? The protein builds the gluten. So if you're making something like a bread, you want to use bread flour because it has the most protein in it, and it will give you the highest gluten result. If you're making something like a cake, you don't want it to be gluten-y and chewy like a bread would be. You want it to be fluffy and light like a sponge. So you'd use cake flour, which has the least amount of protein and the least amount of gluten in it. And all-purpose flour, smack in the middle. Anything in the middle, like a cookie, great. Pastry, great. So that is the difference between the flours, and that's why you use each flour at a different time. So cool. Another cool tip that she gave was to use kosher salt. She says that this is the best salt to use for baking because it has all of the benefits of salt without a very heavy, salty flavor. So if you use something like sea salt, it's the saltiest in flavor of the salts. This one is what she recommends using, so I obviously now have an enormous box because I'll do anything she says. And actually, it really does. It like enhances the flavor without making things overly salty. I was using sea salt before and everything kind of had a little bit of a salty flavor, which I'm not mad about, I kind of like, but this makes things a little bit more even. Kosher salt. Get it at a grocery store near you. Butter, my favorite. So something that she said that I just loved is you should spend all of your extra money on butter. So as bakers, we think that vanilla is the most important and we should buy these, you know, expensive vanilla bean paste that's like $30 for a jar this big. I'm a culprit, I have it, it's in the cabinet, it tastes great. But what she says is if you're gonna spend extra money, you should spend your extra money on cultured or European butter. She says that the way that this is made will make all the difference in all of your bakes from here on out. Now, it's more expensive than regular butter. So unsalted cultured butter will change your bakes, but regular butter's fine, but this is better butter. I keep saying butter. Here's the other cool tip about the butter. So you're doing a bake, you need a stick of butter. What do you normally do? You normally open the butter, toss it in your bowl, and what do you do with this paper? You throw it in the garbage. Am I right? I mean, I threw it in the garbage up until recently, but no. This paper is filled with beautiful, perfect, unsalted, cultured butter. It's still on there. So the pro tip that Christina gives is to save your butter paper. Fold it in half so the pages touch each other. Stick it in the butter drawer in your fridge. And next time you need to grease a pan, pull out your butter paper, rub it on. You need a little bit of oil or a little bit of slickness to saute some veggies, pull out your butter paper, grease it on. Brilliant. Don't waste any of your precious, expensive, cultured butter. You're so smart. I love it. Such a good idea. I have butter all over my hands. Butter is also a moisturizer. Plus now they smell like butter. So good. This is another tip that kind of blew my mind. Not as much as anything can be a flour, but still pretty big. I know we've all probably watched British Bake Off and you always see them measuring out their ingredients on a scale, or you see in certain recipes it'll say 200 grams of flour or something like that instead of a half cup of flour. So there are two ways to measure. There is volumetric, measuring cups, or there's weight-based, which would be your scale. You can do it both ways. I've been doing it with volumetric weight my entire life and most of my bakes come out pretty good. But if you want to be really precise, the best way to do it is by weight. And let me show you. Turn on your scale, tear it to 0 grams. This is a quarter cup. This is just flour. So we'll do a quarter cup and we'll smooth it off, tap the bottom, quarter cup. Let's see how much it weighs. Quarter cup of flour, 32 grams. Okay, let's do it again. Whoop. Quarter cup of flour, 33 grams. Let's do it again. Quarter cup of flour, 36 grams. So it's not crazy different, but it will make a difference. If you're measuring something like your butter or your leavening agents, it can make a huge difference. As you know, we're always trying to measure egg whites here with Kim Joy's bakes, and I bet if we measured them with the scale, it would make all the difference. So it's kind of wild that it's like a totally different measurement each time. Let's just do one more just for fun. Quarter cup, that was also 36. So volumetric versus weight makes a difference. Kind of wild that the same volumetric measurement can be different weights every time. So try to use the scale if you have one when you can. Plus it's kind of fun to use a scale. It's like you're in high school chemistry class again. And those are a few of the tips that I thought were super cool that I learned from Christina Tosi in her Learn Monthly class. That class was so fun. If it comes up again, I highly recommend everyone taking it. I learned how to make my own recipes, cookies, cakes, pies, all the Milk Bar recipes. It's really changed everything with how I'm going to think about baking from now moving forward. Remember, anything can be a flower. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have thumbs, and feel free to subscribe. If you want to see the behind the scenes footage, follow me on Instagram.